Guess who didn't have their memory card in the camera and thought they were recording but weren't? So walking is like the easiest exercise you can do, right? If you've got two functional legs, it's accessible to you, and if you are in a space even like this room, you can pace the room. Do you know what I mean? But we track it, right? We get caught up in the trying to reach 10,000 steps a day. So it turns out the 10,000 steps thing doesn't have a baseline in anything relatively scientific, but let's talk about it anyway. So in 1964, Tokyo was set to host the Olympics, and Dr. Oya, who was head of one of Tokyo's big health clinics, told an engineer from the clockmaster Yamasa Tokekeiki. And basically Dr. Oya was concerned that low levels of physical health in 1960s Japan would make the country look bad, particularly the Olympics being there. This clockmaster got tinkering away and came up with this solution. After 2 years of tinkering, he produced Manpokai, or the 10,000 step meter. Using 10,000 because the metric is nice and round. It sounds good, it looks good, it feels good to say that you did 10,000 of anything. And then if we fast forward to like the early 2010s, there's all these different ways to track your steps. You've got pedometers that clip onto your shoes, clip onto your waist. Fitbit had one that clipped onto you. But then in 2015, Apple kinda shook the smartwatch space. They released their first Apple Watch. And if I remember right, they had an option that was cheaper and more fitness focused. The whole watch itself was fitness focused, but it didn't count your steps, it just tracked them. It would let you know you've been stationary too long or how many times you've been moving. Those were the metrics Apple decided it was best to notify its users about. But then Fitbit, in 2016, released the Fitbit Blaze. It's quite an interesting looking smartwatch. We'll talk more about smartwatches in general in a second. You know, they'd seen that people were using the health conscious Apple Watch, and we're like, let's make ours more health conscious. But we're gonna have a definitive goal, 10,000 steps a day. And if you've owned any Fitbit device or Fitbit-like device, we'll get into that in a bit as well, 10,000 steps is the metric they decide to use. It's like you get a little like balloon. And so the Fitbit Blaze did pretty well. But I think 2019 is where we see the big shift, because that's when Fitbit released their Inspire line. So you had two devices, the Inspire and the Inspire HR. I think the Inspire was like €70, and then the HR was like a bit extra, and that did your heart rate. So their cheapest fitness tracker would essentially just track your steps. It had, I think, some smart capabilities, but its main focus was step tracking. And this is where smartwatches and fitness trackers get interesting, because you have the Apple Watch, where its main purpose is a smartwatch with some fitness. And then you have the Fitbit, the Inspire specifically, where it's a fitness tracker with some smartwatch capability. I just think it's interesting. But these things became widespread to the point where Fitbit meant any fitness tracking device. If you showed someone an Apple Watch and it says, oh, it tracks my steps, they're like, oh, like a Fitbit. The term pedometer has just left people's minds. Is 10,000 steps even a good number to meet? The American Heart Association recommends that adults aim for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic exercise per week. And I think the term intense is important here. A lot of people buy a step tracker thinking it will motivate them to walk more, in the same way people will buy a Kindle because they think it will make them read more. While that might be true for some people, a lot of people think, oh, I met my step goal, I met 10,000 steps. But they just walked around their office, or their home, their school, or their university. 10,000 steps of just going about life is a lot different than 10,000 steps of hiking, or 10,000 steps of like an intense aerobic walk around a track. Now, I'm not saying that 10,000 steps is a bad number to hit. It's still quite a good number, do you know what I mean? 10,000 steps is better than zero. And while there's not been much literature on why 10,000 steps is amazing, a lot of research suggests that just increasing your daily step count can have numerous health benefits for your cardiovascular health, weight loss, reduced risk of chronic illness like diabetes. And just simple ways to do this would be, if you're on an escalator, just walk on the escalator rather than waiting, that kind of thing, just increasing your step goal. Not hitting some arbitrary amount, well, not even arbitrary, some amount that was made by a clock designer because it was a nice round number that sounded good. Do you know what I mean? But again, 10,000 steps is better than zero, is what I'm trying to say. That's why 10,000 steps is the recommendation. It's because a clinician in 1960s Tokyo was worried about the health of the city, talked to a clockmaker. The clockmaker was like, cool, I will make a device that counts to 10,000 steps. Whether Fitbit knew about the 10,000 stepometer or just thought it was a good number, who knows. But that's why 10,000 steps is the recommended. Big thanks for sticking around at the end of the video if you did. I'm trying to do a few more kind of inquisitive kind of videos because that seems to be what's getting traction, and they're very fun to make as well. There's a video here about why these are not really Rubik's Cubes. It's pretty interesting. I don't look at the camera a lot, trying to work on that. If you subscribe, I make very varied content. Don't be surprised if you see stuff about music production or photography or just deep dives like this. And again, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Cheers.